Long before the stadium lights and the roar of thousands, there was the quiet rustle of dawn on East Compton Boulevard. In the soft gray light that comes just before the sun peaks over the California horizon, the streets were still asleep, draped in the cool silence of early morning. The only sound was the rhythmic clicking of metal wheels and the soft squeak of a wire mesh. It was a shopping cart, weathered and slightly crooked, being pushed by a determined man named Richard Williams. He carried not groceries, but hundreds of scavenged, heavy, yellow tennis balls, a mountain of future glory resting in rusted metal. This was the daily ritual, the sacred preparation before the world knew the name Serena. The air was fresh with the scent of dew on cracked asphalt, and the distant promise of the Pacific breeze was just beginning to stir through the palm fronds overhead. The public courts of Compton were a study in resilience. These were not the manicured lawns of country clubs. They were patches of concrete painted green and blue, marked by fissures that ran like tiny rivers across the surface. The nets sagged slightly in the middle, patched up with love and necessity. Yet, under the rising sun, this place felt like a sanctuary. A worn-out wooden bench sat on the sideline, bearing witness to history in the making. A bucket of old tennis balls stood like a sentinel at the net post, the felt worn thin, the rubber peeking through. Richard believed in geometry, in physics, and in the unshakable power of repetition. He taught his daughters that a tennis court was a chessboard, a canvas, and that the racket was merely an extension of a focused mind. As the golden hour of sunrise painted the walls of the adjacent houses in shades of amber and rose, the stage was set for a lifelong study of motion and stillness. Two young girls would emerge from the family van, their hair braided tight with colorful beads that clicked softly together when they walked. Venus was the elder, tall and graceful, with an analytical eye that missed nothing. And then there was Serena, the younger of the two, a bundle of coiled potential with a gaze that seemed to look right through the net and into the distant future. They carried their rackets like warriors carry shields, but there was no battlefield here, only a sacred space of learning. The concrete was already warming up, the heat rising in gentle waves that blurred the distant lines of the court. Richard would dump the basket of balls, their yellow fuzz glowing like little suns against the dark asphalt. He did not speak loudly. His voice was a low, steady drone, counting, correcting, encouraging. The lesson began not with a serve, but with posture. Standing firmly on the baseline, feeling the grit beneath their sneakers, learning to exist in the present moment. The sound of the practice was a unique kind of music. It wasn't a cacophony, but a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The soft bounce of the ball against the court, a muffled percussion. The clean pop of the racket strings, a sharp staccato that cut through the humid air. Pop, pop, pop. It became a meditation, a heartbeat that synchronized the father and the daughters into a single, functioning unit. The sun climbed higher, a blazing California spotlight that chased away the shadows of the morning. Sweat formed tiny beads on their foreheads, catching the light like diamonds. The beads in their hair danced with every pivot and swing. There was no anger in the missed shots, only a quiet adjustment of the elbow, a slight turn of the hip. Richard trained them to ignore the distractions, the barking dogs, the passing sirens, the distant thump of a neighbor's stereo. All that existed was the rotating sphere of the tennis ball and its trajectory through the clean, open air. Compton was more than a backdrop, it was a teacher. The hardness of the courts taught them to be light on their feet, to float instead of stomp. The unpredictability of the cracks in the pavement taught them to adapt, to expect the unexpected bounce and to flow with it rather than fight against it. Richard would often tell them about the history of the game, about Althea Gibson and Arthur Ashe, painting pictures of immaculate grass courts and champions who looked like them. He was building not just athletes, but architects of their own destiny. As the midday heat intensified, stoking the scent of dry grass and gasoline from the passing traffic, the session would wind down. There was always a calmness to the end of the practice, a moment of quiet gratitude. The girls would collect the balls, the worn yellow spheres tumbling back into the rusting shopping cart like tired children returning home. The drive home was a slow glide through the waking city. Sitting in the back of the van, Serena would watch the light filter through the dusty windows, tracing patterns on her hands. She was learning that power did not have to be loud. It could be a quiet hum deep inside. The Compton courts had been a cocoon, a place where the noise of the world was replaced by the controlled chaos of a tennis drill. The afternoons were reserved for homework and rest, the sounds of the court still echoing faintly in their muscles. These were the foundational days, the unglamorous, repetitive years that are never shown on the highlight reels. It was a study in the architecture of greatness, brick by humble brick, under the watchful eye of a father who dreamed with his eyes wide open. The Rhythm of Compton was a slow, steady beat, the baseline of an extraordinary life yet to be fully lived. The air changed when they moved to Florida. It became heavier, denser, wrapping around them like a warm, wet blanket the moment they stepped out of the car. In place of the arid, golden sharpness of California, there was the lush, verdant humidity of the Sunshine State. The Rick Matchey Tennis Academy in Palm Beach was a far cry from the cracked public courts of Compton. Here, the courts were a pristine mosaic of blue and green, lined with crisp white paint that seemed to glow under the relentless afternoon sun. Palm trees stood in regimented lines, their fronds drooping slightly in the still, suffocating heat. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, chlorine from nearby pools, and the rubberized smell of new tennis grips. This was a factory of champions, a place where raw talent was forged into precision weaponry, but for two young girls from the West Coast, it was a strange, new world bathed in a constant, sleepy heat. Life at the academy was a study in discipline. The mornings began not with an alarm clock, but with the sun itself, which streamed through the blinds without apology. There was a quiet efficiency to the dormitory halls, the soft padding of tennis shoes on tile floors as young athletes made their way to the breakfast tables. Venus and Serena were a unit, an inseparable pair moving through the unfamiliar environment with the same synchronicity they displayed on the court. The older students watched them with curiosity, these two sisters with the braids and the laser-focused eyes who spoke little but observed everything. Coach Matchey saw the artistry in their movements, but more than that, he saw the mental fortitude. The court was their classroom, and the Florida sun was their harsh, unforgiving lamp. Hours melted into each other, marked only by the rotation of drills and the slight shift in the shadows of the surrounding palmettos. Sweat was a constant companion. It beaded on the forehead, dripped down the back, and stung the eyes. The thick, humid air clung to the skin, making every breath a conscious effort. Serena, though younger, possessed a density of focus that was mesmerizing to witness. When she gripped the racket, the world seemed to fall away. The chatter of other players, the distant thwack of balls on adjacent courts, even the heavy blanket of the heat, it all receded into a soft, buzzing silence. She developed an on-court ritual, a bounce of the ball that seemed to slow time itself. 1 bounce, 2 bounces, 3. The racket spun in her hand, a wooden extension of her will. The Florida Crucible was less about learning how to hit a tennis ball and more about learning how to inhabit a state of deep, unshakable calm. It was about finding the eye of the storm when everything around you was a whirlwind of competition and expectation. The chemistry between Venus and Serena was the true anchor. They were competitive, yes, but there was a profound gentleness in the way they supported each other. During water breaks, sitting on the shaded bench that overlooked the manicured courts, they would share a towel and a quiet laugh. The shade offered a brief respite, a cool sanctuary from the aggressive blaze of the sun. The sound of ice clinking in plastic water bottles was refreshingly crisp. They talked about home, about the familiar rhythm of their father's voice, about the vision they were chasing. The journey was lonely, distant from friends and the familiar jargon of their old neighborhood, but the loneliness made them tighter. They were writing letters to history without knowing it, sketching dreams on the blue canvas of the hard courts. The day faded slowly, the sun bleeding orange and pink into the horizon beyond the interstate, signaling the end of the rigorous physical work but the beginning of the mental recovery. The evenings in Palm Beach brought a subtle relief. The courts fell silent, the lights flickering off one by one across the vast academy campus. The symphony of cicadas and crickets took over, filling the humid night air with a rhythmic, hypnotic chirping. Resting was just as important as training. It was in these quiet hours that the muscles repaired and the mind cataloged the thousands of balls struck over the course of the day. Serena would often sit by the window, looking out at the dark, swaying silhouettes of the palm trees against the deep purple sky. The physical work was only half the battle. The Florida years were instilling an unbreakable belief. Coach Matchie had told the world he was working with a future world #1, but the truth was more nuanced. He was polishing a natural force, a calm power that had been cultivated on the rough asphalt of Compton and was now flowering in the humid tropics of Florida.